Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Our students face an attention crisis, understanding their distracted minds. Okay, I am Adam Ghazali. I'm the Director of Neuroscape at the University of California, San Francisco, as well as a Professor of Neurology, Physiology, and Psychiatry. I'll be moderating the webinar today. During this presentation, you'll learn about the newest research regarding the impact of technology and attention span as it relates to our students. We'll address questions that the audience submitted at the end of the presentation. So let's get started now. I'm going to start by giving a brief tour of some of the amazing resources that BrainFacts has for educators. We're going to begin by looking at the For Educators page. To find this page, you'll go to the top left corner of the BrainFacts.org homepage. I'll point that out here in your slides. And click on these three horizontal lines. Okay, that will open a sidebar where you'll find For Educators. Okay, let's show you where that is. Okay, the Educator section is full of lesson plans that can be used to teach neuroscience in a classroom, as well as content to help educators better understand the study of neuroscience. You could dive in there a little bit, and what you'll see is along the top, there are 5 subtopics for educator resources that may be of interest to teachers. Okay, first we'll note the For Classroom section, which includes tons of activities to be used during classroom instruction. These activities can be sorted by topic and grade level, so you can find exactly what works for your students. The Teaching Techniques section consists of articles for teachers to learn more about neuroscience and how it impacts their students, including growth mindset, integrating art into STEM teaching, and the truth behind brain-based learning. Overall, there are more than 300 lesson plans, articles, videos, and more. We also want to show you the Find the Neuroscientist program. I'll dive in here for a bit. This database is full of neuroscientists interested in public outreach and working with students and teachers. By filling out the questions, you'll be given a list of local neuroscientists and their contact information. These neuroscientists have volunteered to host a lab tour, participate in a classroom visit, lead an activity, help with Brain Awareness Week, or answer neuroscience-related questions via email. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Larry Rosen is Professor Emeritus and past Chair of the Psychology Department at California State University, Dominguez Hills. He's a research psychologist with specialties in the psychology of technology, including multitasking, social networking, child and adolescent development, and parenting. He has been studying this field for 30+ years and has written 7 books on this topic. So let's proceed, and without any further delay, let's hear from Larry.
Thanks very much, Adam. Appreciate the introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about 3 really vital questions that we need to consider as we talk about attention spans and distraction. What, why, and how? Sounds very simple, but pretty complex, and it's the source of most of the research that I've been doing and others have been doing for decades. Under the what, we have questions such as what are students doing with their technology in and out of class? This is something we study, and I'll be sharing some data with you. What tasks do they attempt to multitask? And then what does multitasking actually do to learning? So let's just jump right in. We've been collecting data using a constant self-report measure on young adults, and by young adults I mean college students, but typically college students who are more in the range of the 18 to 25-year-old bracket. And we've been looking at the same questions asked over 6 separate years with different groups, all that are very similar. And what we find are some really interesting changes happening over the last 6 years. First of all, the amount of emailing among these young adults is decreasing. Excuse me, I have a bit of a touch of bronchitis, so you might hear that in my voice. Second, the number of Facebook friends have been decreasing. Interestingly enough, people who flocked to Facebook in the beginning now seem to be backing off a bit. They're not getting off of Facebook, but they're reducing the numbers of friends, and they're also reducing the amount of time they spend there. Smartphone usage is increasing, and I'm going to give you some statistics on that, some that might surprise you. Social media usage is increasing dramatically, and we'll talk about that because that's a very important point. Texting has increased dramatically. And most importantly, I think, the anxiety about not being able to check in with your smartphone, sometimes called either nomophobia or FOMO, has increased, and we're going to talk about that also. So I've been doing some research over the last 3 or 4 years where we have been having students in college and high school put an app on their phone that monitors their usage daily. What it does is it produces 2 pieces of information for me every day. One is how many times a day do they unlock their phone, and then once their phone is unlocked, how many minutes does it stay unlocked during the day? So I'm going to give you some data. I don't know if you'll be surprised, but these data surprised me. In 2016 and 17, as you can see, these are with college students. They're unlocking their phone 56 and 50 times a day. All of a sudden, there is a big jump between 2017, and we have 2 samples, one of college students in 2018 and one of high school students in 2018, and a big jump from roughly 50 some odd times a day unlocking their phone to unlocking their phone 70 plus times a day. If you see on the bottom of the slide, what that does is it means they're accessing their phone about every 13 or so waking minutes. That's also giving them credit for sleeping 8 hours a day, which we know they don't. In terms of total minutes, we saw a huge jump in time between 2016 and 2017. In 2016, we were looking at people using their smartphone 220 minutes a day, which seems, actually at the time, it seemed like a huge amount of time, almost 4 hours a day, until we saw a large jump between 2016 and 17 to 262 minutes, then 260 minutes, and 270 minutes with our high school kids. What's really important is on the bottom, what you'll see is this means that in the beginning, they were spending 4 to 5 minutes each time they unlocked their phone, and now they're only spending 3 to 4 minutes. So what we see is a group of young adults and kids who will unlock their phone, check it for a couple of minutes, lock their phone, and then maybe 10 minutes later, unlock it, check it, unlock it, check it, and they do this over and over all day, and for many of them, also all night. Since many of you are teachers, I thought I would share with you some preliminary results from our high school seniors. This is from last year. We're now using a even larger group of high school seniors this year, and we have somewhere upwards of about 100 high school seniors who have an app on their phone and are monitoring what they are doing on their phone each and every day. The interesting part of this study is that we're planning on then going in and describing some changes that these high school seniors can make. And you'll see some of these changes later in my talk when I give you some of the strategies. We're going to give them some strategies to use, which will hopefully decrease the amount of time they spend on their phones, but enhance their experience with their smartphone. So without further ado, let me give you some information about what we learned preliminarily. Those who spent more daily minutes on their phone, these are high school seniors, showed a lower GPA. They had what we call smartphone separation anxiety, meaning if they were not near their phone, they got very anxious, or if their phone was working, or if there was no Wi-Fi or no access. They were more bored and inattentive both in and out of class, and they were less likely to have study strategies. So this is a group of people who are spending more time on their phone and are having problems on a lot of different levels. Also, interestingly enough, those who unlock their phone most often during the day showed more use of communication apps. That means social media, texting, email, phone, all of the above. I'm going to show you a couple graphs here from a group called Common Sense Media. If you're not aware of this group, you should be, because they provide all sorts of interesting strategies and information about how to use technology with young people. And in 2012 and then again in 2018, they did a study on how teens prefer to communicate with their friends. If you look at the left-hand side, you'll see that in 2012, they most preferred, nearly half of them preferred to talk to their friends, communicate with their friends in person. And strikingly, just 6 years later, the preference is now texting rather than in person. And if you count up all the different ways that they communicate with their friends now electronically, it is 2/3 of their choices in communication. That's a very important fact because this is part of what is driving the behavior among our students, is that their desperate need to keep communicating virtually with their friends. That same survey showed that social media is also exploding among teens. In 2012, only 34% of the teens said that they check social media more than once a day, and now in 2018, 70%, that's 70% of them, check their social media more than once a day. That's awesome. And we find research from our college students that they have an active presence on at least 6 social media sites, which is, as I call it, a large social obligation to juggle. In our research with millennials, you can see on the bottom of the screen the scale that we use on our self-report measures, but just look at the blue lines and you'll see that these are reflective of all the things that millennials are doing with their technology. Number one is texting, which matches what Common Sense Media finds. And then you'll see that there's a lot of other activities on there that are communication-based. Smartphone usage, emailing, social media, telephone, etc. So we move on and talk about multitasking, because multitasking is really a myth. Can you really multitask? No. What you're really doing is either what's called task switching, or sometimes referred to as continuous partial attention. Basically, what's happening in your brain is that you're focusing attention on one aspect of, say, a task that you're studying, and then all of a sudden you get a text, and so you switch from that task to the other, and what we see in your brain is an actual switching of the focus of the brain activity at that moment. The continuous partial attention comes in where what we find when kids are studying, particularly in their home when they're surrounded by all their technology, is that they give a little bit of attention to something and then get distracted and move to something else, and then they move back to something else and on to something else, and they are continuously paying just small pieces of attention to what they're supposed to be doing rather than full attention. And we all know that unless you pay full attention to something, you're not going to process it thoroughly enough to actually learn it. There is a theory that's out there that is an old theory that I like to describe called bottleneck theory that explains why you really can't multitask. And imagine that you have a liter container, say, of Coca-Cola, and you're going to pour some water into the spout. Now, what happens if you take 2 glasses and try to pour 2 glasses worth of water into the spout at the same time? The water won't even get down into the bottle. It'll splash back all over you because you have created a bottleneck. And this is really a model of what happens to our students as they're studying and trying to task switch often and provide continuous partial attention. A lot of this depends on brain development. And the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain, as you'll see later, that is responsible for all of the executive functions that people do, develops much more slowly than other parts of the body and particularly of the brain. It is actually the last part of the brain to fully develop and is not developed fully until the mid to late 20s, if not even later. So what that means is that the neuronal structure of the prefrontal cortex in teenagers and even younger kids, but even millennials up to the age of late 20s, early 30s, is not fully developed. And so the tasks that are done by the prefrontal cortex, basically your brain's controller, are not done as efficiently as they should be as you get older. Is this biochemical? I'm going to talk a little bit later about stress and anxiety hormones, which I think drive a lot of the behavior. So what is doing what is the problem? What is driving them to be inattentive? And really, I believe all of my decades of research shows that technology is really one of the most important driving forces. And there's 2 kinds of driving forces here. There's external interruptions, which occur in the outside world. And if I hadn't turned off the Do Not Disturb, my phone would be beeping with alerts and notifications that would then be distracting me from what I'm supposed to talk about. And if you look at your smartphone, you will see that each of the icons for apps on your smartphone have color on them. And that's not an accident. The app developers pick colors for their icons and contrasting colors to get your attention, to take your eyeballs and drag them from not looking at your phone to looking at your phone and looking at their specific icons. And that's a really important point because that's fixable. And I don't know how old the people are in the audience right now, but television has changed dramatically. When I was young, we would watch shows that had long scenes, and by long scenes I mean maybe 2, 3, 4 minute long scenes. I remember as a child watching a show called Perry Mason, and you would always see these long courtroom scenes where he would be talking to witnesses and talking to the judge and making proclamations. And I realized as my kids grew up that the kinds of shows that they watched went from shows like Sesame Street that had basically fairly long scenes, maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes, to Sesame Street Revised that had very short scenes and very quick changes. And now if you watch any show that kids typically watch on TV, you'll basically be surprised at how many scenes they cram into 1 half-hour show, because the typical scene on a kid's show is only about 45 seconds now. Then there are also what we call internal interruptions. These are ones that happen inside your brain, either mind wandering or boredom or thinking about things that are exciting, thinking about things that make you anxious, or possibly both going on at the same time. Psychologists and neuroscientists worry about basically 3 different effects on our children, and I'm going to try to cover these 3 as I talk. First is lack of social skills. In order to develop good social skills, you need to be able to gather context. And context is gathered from talking to someone face-to-face and looking at their body language, looking at their facial expressions, looking at all the nonverbal cues that teach you when someone is upset, when someone is happy, when someone feels a certain emotion. And the concern is when kids are spending so much more time texting or on social media that they're not developing those contextual social skills that they need in order to survive in the work world, for sure, but even in school. Second issue is shallow thinking, and that is if you're only spending a couple minutes looking at something, then how can you possibly process it deeply enough so that you will remember it the next day or the next week? And then finally, from a neuroscience point of view, there is a lot of concern that the brain development of very sensitive brain pathways that help you learn are being disrupted by technology. So let's talk about some actual data and what people do. I am very interested in watching people study, and I've done a series of studies on studying, and I'd like to describe to you the basic format. In this study, this was our very first study that we did of this, and if you're interested, I'd be glad to share the reference for you. You can always find, by the way, if you go to drlarryrosen.com and look at the publications tab or the research tab and look at publications, everything that I'm showing you is housed there, all copies of all my publications. Who we observed, and I trained several hundred observers to go in to their home, to the kids' homes, either middle school student, a high school student, and a college student. And by the way, as a preamble to the results, there were no differences in studying between middle school students, high school students, and college students. I sent them in to do 2 things. One, to tell them that they were supposed to study something very, very, very important for about 15 minutes, and that was it. And then they would sit back and observe, and every minute they would note, is the person on task, meaning are they studying what they said they were going to study, or are they off task? And off task turned out to be much more interesting than on task. They looked to see what was on their computer screen. We asked them their daily use of technology and media so we could look at the heaviest users. We had a questionnaire that assessed whether they had studying strategies. We asked a question about whether they preferred to either work on something until it was done or work on a task for a little bit and switch to something else and then switch back, called task switching or multitasking. And then finally, we asked them their grade point average. That'll come in handy in a few minutes here. So this is a chart of their studying behavior. On the left-hand side, it shows the percentage of time that they were on task or off task. And I want you to note that even though they knew we were watching them, And even though they were studying something really important, basically they were on task between 65 and 70% of the time, that's all. And on the bottom are the minutes 1 through 15 where we were making our observations. So you can see, for the first couple minutes, they were as focused as they were going to get, and then they got distracted, and then they started to focus again, but at the 8, 9, 10-minute mark, they got very distracted, and then they started to focus again, but even though they were able to focus at the very end, knowing full well that they hadn't focused for the entire 15 minutes, that tailed off, and we figure if we kept watching them, we would see the same pattern of about 3 to 5 minutes of focus and then distraction, and 3 to 5 minutes of focus and then distraction. There's research out there that has shown that this is exactly the same results that you find with computer programmers, and very scarily you find with medical students studying in a medical library. We also, if you remember, we also monitored windows that were open on their screen, and what you see here is that the number of windows that are open starts low and then starts to grow and grow and grow. As they're studying, they keep opening more and more windows. And remember that 8 to 9 to 10 minute where they were the most distracted is the time that they had the most. And sadly, those who were most off task, those students who couldn't stay on task as much, had the most open windows. We also were looking to see what would predict someone getting a good GPA in school and what would predict someone getting a poor GPA. And interestingly, we found 5 things. The first one will surprise you. Those who were able to stay on task for more of our 15 minutes had a higher GPA in school. Those who had study strategies had a higher GPA in school. Those who preferred to task switch, meaning they preferred to look at one thing and then look at another and look at back and forth, had a lower GPA. Those who consumed more daily media had a lower GPA. And then remember, every minute we noted what was in the middle of their screen, and we looked to see if any websites were particularly distracting, and it turned out only one website was distracting, and that was Facebook. And if they checked Facebook even just once during the 15 minutes, they had a lower GPA. So there is something going on in our students called metacognition. And metacognition, on a broad level, is knowing how your brain works, knowing how you think. But with technology, it's knowing how you best work in an environment where you have tons of technology around you. Because most kids study with their smartphone and their laptop and probably a tablet around. And metacognition would be knowing how to reduce those distractions. Also, knowing when your brain gets overloaded from too much technology and how to calm that down. So let me describe to you a study that shows you why it's important to be metacognitive. It's a task that we did with university students. We had 4 university classes with about 175 students. And a day before we were going to do the study, we asked them to give us their cell phone number and their cell phone carrier. And we told them that we were going to be doing a study in their class. And when they got into the classroom, we told them they were going to be watching a 30-minute video lecture. It turned out it was on psychology. That exactly at the end of the video lecture, we were going to be giving them a test, and the teacher agreed that the test would count toward their grade. So we tried to make it as strict as possible. And then we told them to put their phone on just vibrate and put it in front of them, and that they might get a text message from us during the film. What they didn't know is the class was split in thirds. A third got no text from us, a third got 4 text messages, and a third got 8 text messages. And the text messages were timed to arrive at exactly the time on the screen that the material that was shown on the video was going to be on the test. So we're really trying to maximally disrupt them and distract them here. And we didn't just send them text messages that they could write back OK or K or LOL. We had questions that required quite a few words of response. In fact, our average response was about 9 words. And this is an example of one of the questions. What is your major and why did you choose it? You can't just write LOL for that. You have to actually write a response. So here's our results of the test they took after the 30-minute video. The group that got 0 text got a C, which is the way we created the test. The group that got 4 texts also got a C and didn't differ from the group that got 0 text, but the group that got 8 texts got a D. Now, the interesting thing to me is that we had information from them that we copied down from their phones when they left the classroom And what we had was when they received the text message from us and when they read it and responded to it. And so the question is, did anybody show metacognition? Those who immediately read and responded to the text message got a C on the test. But there were a few who waited for a few minutes to read and respond to the text, and they got an A. And since we had their phone number, we texted them and said, hey, we asked you to respond to our text messages, and we noticed that you waited for a minute or two to respond. How come? And they said, well, we were waiting until there was something on the video that we were pretty sure was not going to be on the test. That's called metacognition. I thought that was pretty impressive of them. So now let's move to the why. Why is an interesting question because students know the technology is distracting. They're aware of that, but why do they allow themselves to be distracted? And why is multitasking one of the biggest distractions, detrimental to learning? And why do students think they're so darn good at multitasking? Because they do. In one study, which I'm not going to describe, we asked young students a list of a bunch of tasks paired together and asked them if they felt that they could do those tasks together and whether it was easy to do them together. Many of these were difficult tasks, like reading a book while playing a video game. Those are two difficult tasks to do at the same time. The young students felt that they could do 87% of the tasks together easily. Shocking. So one of the reasons for the why is something we call technological anxiety, although you might have heard it called nomophobia or no mobile phone phobia, which is anxiety or distress that people might feel when they don't have their phone, not being able to get a signal, or running out of battery power. And so we've done some studying on that, and this is a study done by my colleague Nancy Cheever, where she brought college students into a big room. Half of them went in one door and were told, put your books and turn your phone off, put your books underneath your desk, and just sit there and don't do a thing. Not allowed to talk to anybody, don't do anything. The other half came in the other door, and they were told exactly the same instructions, except they were told, give us your phone and we'll give you a claim check and give your phone back later on. So we really thought we were looking at, is there a difference between having your phone nearby or having it taken away and removed? Spoiler alert, turns out it didn't make a bit of difference. If they couldn't access their phone, they all acted the same way. 10 minutes into the study, we gave them a self-report measure of anxiety. 20 minutes later, at 30 minutes into the study, they got the same self-report measure, and 60 minutes into the study, they got the same self-report measure. And mind you, they were allowed to do nothing during this hour, absolutely nothing. We were trying to induce a state of boredom, and we think what we did is induce a state of anxiety. Because here's what we found. What you see on the left-hand side is increasing anxiety from low to high. What you see on the bottom are the data from 10 minutes, 30 minutes in, and an hour in. By the way, we were going to run the study for longer than an hour, but Dr. Cheever felt that the anxiety level, as you'll see, was so high that she was afraid students were going to have panic attacks. So here's our light daily phone users. And what we did, by the way, is we just divided, based on their responses to how often they check their phone during the day, we divided them into thirds: light users, moderate users, and what we call heavy users. So the light users, at 10 minutes, they showed low anxiety, and that anxiety stayed low the entire time. The moderate users, however, started at the same point, but 30 minutes in, they started to get anxious, but that leveled off at a moderate anxiety level. What do you think happened to the heavy users? The heavy users, 10 minutes in, were already more anxious, 30 minutes in were highly anxious, and 60 minutes in were on the border between anxiety and a panic attack. So another issue that we've been studying under the why is the role of boredom. People talk about us having a shortened attention span, and some people even say that we have a shorter attention span now than a goldfish. Not sure that goldfish have much of an attention span, although someone measured it and said it was about 9 seconds. There's research in a lot of different arenas, lots of different researchers showing the same thing we found when we went to the studying, that kids are able to focus for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then they get distracted, and oftentimes there's up to a 20-minute period before they get back to the task at hand, which is called a resumption lag. And interestingly, research on arousal levels shows that if somebody is studying and they switch to something more fun, and by more fun what I mean is playing a video game, watching a video, going on social media, something that's much more interesting than studying, you can actually see their arousal levels start rising at about 30 seconds before they actually make the change. And by the time they make the change, they're very aroused because they're very excited about changing. So those students who are studying and focusing for 3 to 5 minutes, at the 5-minute mark when they've changed, their brain has really been gone for about 30 seconds already. And constant second screening is really important because what we find with students as we watch them is they cannot afford to be bored. They cannot allow boredom. And so anytime they think they're bored, they jump on their phone and second screen. So I mentioned earlier the prefrontal cortex, and I want to let you know a little bit about what it does. It is your executive controller. It controls working memory, which is how you work on a problem that you're trying to solve. It really it controls your attention and your focus. It controls how you make decisions in your decision-making process. It controls multitasking and whether you switch that focus to something else. And then really problematically for young kids is it controls your impulses and making impulsive responses. So here's how we test the why. On the left-hand side, you see what I call control variables. And these are variables that are probably interesting and people have studied them before, but I'm really not interested, so I would just rather control them. We know that girls respond differently than boys. We know that people of different ages respond differently, but we'd rather not study them. So we're studying at really 3 levels: independent variables, mediators, and dependent variables. Under the independent variables, we have executive functioning problems, we have boredom and anxiety, those 3 that I've been talking about. Under the mediators, we have smartphone use, and then more specifically social media use, that multitasking preference, whether they prefer to work on a task till it's done or multitask and switch back and forth. Attention and focus, meaning how many minutes can they focus on their studying, and then what we call digital metacognition. Are they aware of what to do with their phone when, say, they're in class or they're studying or they're getting ready to go to bed? And then our dependent variable is a variety of problem behaviors. And I'm going to just give you 2 examples to show you what we're finding. So we've been looking at trying to predict course performance among college students in a college course. And we did 2 4-month-long studies with more than 350 students looking at self-rated technology usage. We put an app on their phone to find out how much time they're using their smartphones, like the data I talked about earlier. We included measures of anxiety, executive function, and boredom, so we could look at our independent variables. We had self-reported daily use of the top 12 social media sites, so we look at how much time they spend on social media. We had a measure called classroom digital metacognition, letting us know whether they knew what to do in the classroom. And then we had a couple other measures that turned out not to be so important, so I'm going to ignore them for now. So here's our model, and here's a couple interesting things that we find. If you have a low executive functioning, that directly drives your course grade. Those students who had the lower executive functioning got a lower grade in class. For the nomophobia variable, that anxiety variable, they also got a low grade in class if they had more anxiety. And now we get to boredom. Those who were more bored used more social media, and those who were more bored showed lower classroom digital metacognition, meaning they were less likely to know what to do with their phone in the classroom. Those with nomophobia, more smartphone daily usage, more daily social media usage, and also suffered from classroom digital metacognition problems. And then both social media usage and metacognition predicted their final course grade. You can see the why is actually kind of complex. It's a combination of what I would say are cognitive variables, like executive function, affective variables like nomophobia, and then boredom, which I think is sort of a cognitive and affective variable both at the same time, impacting smartphone usage or social media usage or metacognition, which then in turn influences grade. I'm just going to show you another one that we did studying sleep problems. Same kind of model. We weren't studying boredom yet. We hadn't figured that out yet. But you'll see basically the same kind of thing. The anxiety dependence variable turns out to be important and drives metacognition, which I would say knowing where to put your phone at night is a metacognitive variable, and waking up at night to check your phone is a metacognitive variable, and all of these conspire to give you sleep problems. So now let's move on to the how. We start with a model that Adam and I developed for our book, The Distracted Mind, based on animal foraging behaviors. In particular, animals are driven to survive, and so their behaviors aren't random. They exist in what are called patchy environments, which are areas, say a squirrel has an acorn, there's a patch of acorns, and they need to know when to stay in that environment and when they need to move because the acorns are running out, and pretty soon they're going to need to find a place that has more acorns. So what was developed was something called an optimal foraging model. And here's the model. I don't want to spend time on the model. You just see on the right-hand side is how much time they spend foraging in their current patch, and the left-hand side is how long it takes them to get to a new patch. And what's more important is what happens with the animals. So here's our squirrel climbing up a tree to get some acorns, decides to climb back down the tree, runs around trying to find a new place to go, and makes a poor decision and gets eaten by a hawk. So the question is, what will make us better information foragers? So on the transit time to a new patch, deciding how long it will take, we need to increase our metacognition, and we also need to decrease our accessibility of technology. And I'll give you some strategies in a second how to do that. On the right-hand side, for how long we should spend in the same place in our current patch, which you can think of a patch for a student as maybe studying an English lesson. That could be a patch. And in order to do that, in order to keep them there for the optimal amount of time, they need to increase their metacognition and learn to decrease their anxiety and decrease their boredom. So now we get to the how and the strategies. How can we help our students succeed? I'm going to give you a lot of strategies. Some of these are tested in the literature. Some of them are new. We're in process of testing some of these with high school students and getting excited about what we're finding. So one way is to improve their metacognition. One of the things I always do with my students is I try to explain to them the cost of test switching. I give them the data of what happens when you test switch and how you don't learn as much, how you get more stress. And I also make them watch CNN in particular, and I give them a task. I say, what I want you to do is read the crawl at the bottom of the screen and read it out loud, and at the same time, then try to decide if you can figure out what Anderson Cooper is saying at the moment, and then switch it. Look at the crawl and see if you can read anything from the crawl while you're listening intently to Anderson Cooper. And they quickly discover that they cannot do both of them at the same time because they lead to lower learning, increased time to learn, and in particular, increased stress. And people are finding that in lots of research studies, that the way students are studying is making them have to study longer and later into the night, and also increasing their stress and anxiety. Another strategy on improving metacognition is how can you be metacognitive if you don't know what you're doing with technology? And there are apps out there that students can put on their phone that will monitor how they're doing with technology. Or there's on all new iPhones with iOS 12, there's an app called Screen Time, which tells you exactly how many times you unlocked your phone, how many minutes you spent on your phone, where you spent that time with which apps. It tells you how many notifications you got during the day and which apps are notifying you. All the information that you need to know in order to become metacognitive. And very soon, Android devices, all Android devices will have a very similar app called Digital Wellbeing. More strategies to decrease accessibility. I teach my students to create technology-free zones. And in that means for studying students, that means that where you're going to study, remove your technology or keep it away, except for the technology that you need for studying. Don't introduce technology like a television set or a tablet that you're watching a movie on while you're supposed to be studying. For parents, by the way, I talk about technology-free zones being the dinner table, restaurants, when you're watching TV with kids, in the car, any place that you can communicate with your kids. Creating quiet work and study area, teaching students to only single screen rather than multiple screens. I teach students that when they're using a computer or when they're using a phone in the middle of studying, that the tendency is to say, well, as long as I just minimize the windows that I'm not using, that'll be fine. Or as long as I hide the apps, that'll be fine. But that doesn't work because those windows pop up numbers that tell you that, oh, you just got an alert or notification on Facebook or something and beckon you to check it. So I talk about closing all the windows and apps and tabs and not just minimizing them. In particular, from what we know from our research, keeping social apps way out of sight, and I'll give you some suggestions on how to do that. Turning off all notifications and alerts, and I'll amend that by saying, your mom ought to be able to get through to you, and your dad ought to be able to get through to you, but nobody else. Closing your email. If email is a problem for people, which, by the way, it is for me, I'm an email junkie, that's my poison, and when I need to write or do some serious work, I literally close my email and turn it off because I know it will distract me when I get a beep or I see a new email showing up. And then consider checking it on a schedule, like every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, and actually use an alarm to have you do that. There are also apps that will help control the environment. These are the ones, a couple that I think are pretty good. You can read about more of these in my book. And then take what I call tech breaks. Tech breaks is where you allow the student to check everything they want for 1 minute, just 1 minute, and you set an alarm to give them 1 minute to do it. And then you have them set their phone for 15 minutes, turn it on to silent, turn it upside down and put it right in front of their face, very close so they can see it. Upside down, by the way, so that they don't see it flashing, and in front of their face, so it's a stimulus to their brain that says, you'll get to check me in 15 minutes or less. Then when the alarm goes off, they get 1 minute, set on the clock to check anything they want, open any programs on their computer, open any apps, check it real quickly, and then keep repeating 1 minute, 15 minutes, 1 minute, 15 minutes, until the alarm for 15 minutes goes off and they say to themselves, wait a minute, I'm right in the middle of doing something, I'm not going to check my stuff right now, I'm going to wait. And then you start increasing it from 15 minutes to 20, 25, 30. And my feeling is, working with students, is if you can get them to check something for a minute or two, have 30 minutes of focus time where they don't get distracted by their smartphone and their material that's on their screen, and then check it again for 1 to 2 minutes, that you win. And then also, based on what we learned from our sleep study, make better nighttime choices. National Sleep Foundation suggests highly that you remove the phone from the bedroom an hour before bedtime. And the reason is because the light-emitting diodes in the phone actually retard the production of melatonin, which is the hormone that puts you to sleep, and increase the production of hormones like cortisol, which wake you up. So they exactly serve the opposite purpose. And so if you remove the phone an hour before sleep, that melatonin gets to increase slowly and slowly put you to sleep and get you to have a good night's sleep. So here's some more strategies on how to decrease the anxiety. I've been trying to teach kids to not be Pavlov's dog, because Pavlov's dog reacted to a stimulus. And we act a bit like Pavlov's dog. If we get a text, we immediately look at it, we immediately try to send something back, and then we watch those little bubbles waiting for the response back so we can talk back exactly the instant that we get the text. That's Pavlovian, and got to teach people not to do that. I've even talked to kids and told them that maybe when you get a text message, set an alarm for a minute and don't even look at it for a minute. But you have to tell everybody you're doing it, because otherwise all your friends who are Pavlov's dogs are trained to do that. You need to set expectations for others. You need to tell everybody that you're not going to be responding immediately, that you're not going to be jumping on, because you might not be on social media as often because you realize what effect it's going to have on you. I encourage people to use automatic email and social replies and social media posts that say, I'm trying to increase my focus and attention. If I don't respond immediately, it doesn't mean anything. I'm just trying to increase my focus and attention so I can learn better. There are apps available to auto-reply to calls and texts. If you set Do Not Disturb on your phone, you can auto-reply easily. You can also, like I said, allow calls from people with potential emergencies. On Do Not Disturb, at least on my iPhone, if somebody calls twice, it gets through, but if somebody only calls once, it doesn't. And then practice meditation and mindfulness. Turns out that mindful meditation, which, by the way, there's an app for that, there's many apps for that, helps you reduce your anxiety, be more centered, be more in the present, and not feel like you have to be a Pavlov's dog. Also, research that shows that physical exercise reduces anxiety. And when you talk about decreasing boredom, you need to program in breaks to reset your brain. And there's tons of research that we talk about in the book that allows you to do this. Going out in nature, exercising resets your brain. Taking short naps is a good way to reset your brain. Talking to another human being resets your brain. Reading a joke book, grabbing a snack, listening to music. There's lots of things you can do to reset your overloaded, anxiety-riddled brain and help you get back to doing important work. Standing and sitting increases blood to your brain. I am standing right now on a treadmill desk, and I do not sit in a chair anymore. I haven't done so for years, and what I found is it makes me more productive and less prone to boredom. Playing familiar music in the background, as long as it's very familiar music, and I tell kids it's got to be music that you can sing in your sleep. That will help you reduce the boredom. And then using those tech breaks that I talked about to increase how long you can spend focusing is really important. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'll throw it back to Adam.
Great. Thanks, Larry. That was an amazing overview of a complicated and developing field, and I know there's going to be lots of questions. I see some now, so I'll just field some of these, and as more contribute, I will pass them along to you. Maybe to start, one of the questions is a lot of them are focused on practical strategies, which you just covered in your last several slides. But one that maybe you could dive in a little deeper, since a lot of teachers are in our audience, is specifically about what some of the methods might be to focus students' attention in the classroom itself while they're in class.
That's a very good question. One of the things that you have to recognize is, regardless of what you do, kids have a short attention span. And so having long lessons simply doesn't work. I remember speaking to a teacher who was using a flipped classroom system for his algebra class. And he was recording his lecture, and I watched him record his lecture, and he would record about 9 to 10 minutes, and then he'd turn it off and save that, and then he'd record another 9 to 10 minutes and turn it off and save that. And I asked him why he didn't just record the whole 30-minute lecture. He said, because my students can only listen and focus for 9 to 10 minutes. So anything that you're doing in the classroom, sadly, has to be short and to the point. Another thing that I've learned over the years of working with students and teachers is that the more visual you can make the lessons, the more attention you're going to get from the students. One of the top 4 social media sites for students, and one of the top things that they spend their time doing, is watching videos online. Videos are very captivating to students, and so I noticed that the BrainFacts materials that Adam was talking about earlier has a lot of videos there, and those would be very helpful to use with students. The more you can make it visual, the better.
Great. Maybe related to that question, I'll just riff off of it a little bit in terms of technology use in the classroom. So, a lot of teachers and educators are interested in the potential to use these, new delivery systems of information during their programs and their lessons. How do you suggest managing some of the challenges that it introduces with the potential benefits that it offers?
That is also a great question, and I visited many classrooms, some of which were very successful at using technology, and some of which admitted to being failures. There were a couple points that seemed to fit with those that were very successful. One was they allowed the students to use the device that they typically use during their own day. So it's called a BYOD, bring your own device, and the students typically brought their phones because that's what they were most familiar with. In order to make that work, though, the teacher had to develop a way of getting them to not get distracted. And so one of the ways that the teachers did that was successful was moving any app icons from the front screen to another screen so that the home screen only contained icons that were available for classroom use. That way, those little icons weren't calling to the students to come tap me and look to see who posted on Instagram or Snapchat. Also, turning off all communication forms is really helpful. And then again, keeping those lessons really short and then interspersing them with discussion and with teacher material really seemed to be indicative of a classroom where it was going to work. Interestingly, classrooms where it didn't work were classrooms where the kids had access to the devices all day long. They typically were classrooms where the kids were teenagers who were on social media a lot, and they just couldn't keep their hands off the social media apps, and that caused problems.
Great. How about, to move slightly from the classroom, but just to the bigger messaging, it seems that a lot of teachers may want to know how to best convey to parents the need to limit technology or to set, limits with time using social media and technology, and how to convey this. You just, very elegantly went through an entire presentation that broke it down, but you don't always have that opportunity with a parent. What do you recommend?
Well, this information gleaned from years of speaking to parent groups because that's what I enjoy the most. And I think that part of the problem is that this is something that is difficult to do. Kids typically use their devices in their bedrooms, and they're typically out of sight and quiet, and out of sight can often be out of mind. And so what I have parents do is, first of all, have your students study in a common area. So you always have access to what they're doing, and set a timer for the amount of time that they can use technology, and also set a timer that allows them to take periodic breaks and check in. The students feel much better and are much more able to attend if their parents understand that the bulk of their social life, while much of it is played out in the real world, the bulk of their social life is really played out virtually, online. And the reason that they're constantly on their phone and picking up their phone and tapping some keys and picking up their phone and tapping and so on and so forth is because they're getting messages from their online friends. And like I said before, they've developed this habit that they must respond to messages immediately. And so they're sitting there waiting for messages. So one of the things that you can do is build in communication breaks so that the kids know that if they study for 15 minutes, they get a couple-minute break. That's the tech break idea. And that you slowly develop that into studying for longer and longer periods of time. And once again, everybody has to be aware that they're doing this because otherwise their friends are going to start yelling at them, why didn't you respond to my text immediately?
Makes sense. Here's something related to one of your earlier points, but asking for a little bit more details, is how do we as educators embrace metacognition as a daily ritual in teaching at the K-12 level? How do we bring that into practice?
In the past, say a decade ago, the teachers at the college level used to teach something called media literacy. And media literacy sort of subsumed metacognition. It talked about how to get good usage out of the internet, things like that, how to write good emails. Right now, media literacy really is important to teach with kids, and I think it's just as important as study skills and even sex education, that we start with young kids, K through 12, and we start talking to them about what's appropriate online and what's not appropriate online, what's good metacognitive behavior and what's bad metacognitive behavior. And that we don't wait until they have a phone, because by then it's too late. We start with them when they're in kindergarten, literally. I mean, my 5 and 6 and 5-year-old grandkids have been using smartphones and tablets since essentially they could sit up straight and hold on to it. And we talk a lot to them about metacognition, of when it's appropriate to use it, why it's not okay during dinner to use your tablet, why mommy and daddy say, no, you can't use your tablet while you're watching a movie. It's second screening. So it's starting to talk on the developmental level of the kids at a very young age and getting it so that by the time they get that first phone, they're already used to the rules. They're used to the metacognitive ideas.
Great. Maybe sort of related to improving attention, but rather than the sort of behavioral strategies that you discussed and how to change the environment that they're in, the tech environment, what would you say are some strategies to enhance attention abilities in young people when the environment cannot be changed? So just more in a general manner.
I'm not sure I understand about the environment not being able to be changed, because I think you can always change the environment.
I think where they may be going with this question is, improving attention more generally. Maybe I'll sort of riff on this answer a little bit, since it's a lot of what I focus on. The data would suggest that in parallel to changing the environment and all the great ideas that Larry had shared, that, for example, physical exercise, not just in its acute impact on attention, but could have longer-lasting, more chronic improvements in the prefrontal cortex and attention abilities over time. So that's one activity that I think the data is pretty convincing could help attention more globally. Another activity, and there's still lots of questions about how young a child can be and engage in it, but certainly in adolescence and young adulthood, is mindfulness and meditation. Training where you have a period of time that you focus internally, like on your breath or on some words, and sort of cut down the constant external stream of information, which is constantly fragmenting your thinking. And then, as Larry mentioned, certain during breaks, but even more globally, is in terms of just improving brain function in the same area, is exposure to nature. The data is also increasing that time in natural environments can also help, not just with stress and mood, but also attention abilities and sort of restoring that cognitive fatigue that we all get. So those are a couple things that I think should be part of everyone's life to help maintain the attention systems at a high level.
Thanks for jumping in, Adam. I think that I want to double down on the nature issue, because part of what I think is important, particularly at a young age for kids, is to have time in nature. And by nature, I don't mean going out necessarily in the forest or anything, just going outside, getting away from the technology, free play, creative play. That always just enhances creativity and performance, but also calms the brain and gets you ready to go back to work. Great.
Larry, looks like we're coming in to our last several minutes, but I just want to maybe give you a couple minutes to talk about an area that I know is dear to your heart from writing the book with you, is the benefits and importance of sleep, and how technology has compromised that and some of the issues related to that. I know you touched on it a little bit, but I thought that maybe a couple more minutes in conclusion would be helpful in that really important area.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate that. Sleep is critical to thinking. So much goes on in your brain in the middle of the night that a good night's sleep promotes, and in the vernacular of psychology, a good night's sleep promotes what's called consolidation and pruning, meaning material that you learn during the day gets consolidated and literally practiced at night, and material that you no longer need gets pruned away. But a third task of your brain in the middle of the night is to deal with all of the little molecules that are left over from thinking and flush those out so you can start the day fresh. That only happens if you get a good night's sleep. If you don't get a good night's sleep, a lot of those molecules, particularly beta amyloids, are left floating in your brain, and eventually those retard learning. So I can't even tell you how important it is for kids to turn off their phone an hour before bedtime. I always recommend one of three things between then and bedtime. One is to watch a TV show that's a familiar TV show that they like, that doesn't take a lot of mental processing. Another is to read a paper book, because the light off a paper book is not blue light, which retards the melatonin. And then third is to listen to music, but only music that they can sing in their sleep. And that's really important. All three of those activities will calm their brain and help the melatonin put them to sleep and help them learn better and retain the information better.
Wonderful. Larry, thanks so much. I always enjoy hearing you share your thoughts and perspectives on this topic. So thank you very much for sharing with everyone today.
Thank you.
And thank everyone that joined us for the webinar today. If you have any further questions, you could continue to submit them. And after we close, a short survey will come up, and we encourage everyone to give your feedback so we can continue to improve BrainFacts.org webinars. Thanks again, everyone, and we look forward to you being part of our future events. Thank you.